Hello, everyone. My name is Raul Maltez, and I'm with Dr. Joseph Sievely at the Center for Natural Healthcare in Red Wing, Minnesota. Next year, 2023, Dr. Sievely will be celebrating 40 years in clinical practice using chiropractic, acupuncture, and functional medicine. He comes to us with significant experience in helping patients with complex health problems like autoimmune disease, which is our topic for today. Dr. Joe, I'd like to jump right into our topic for today. Could you share with us what is autoimmune disease?
Thank you, Raul, for the question. And I'd like to just first of all greet everyone and say thank you for joining us on our video blog post for today on autoimmune disease. So autoimmune disease is when the body's immune system no longer recognizes our own body or tissues as self, but rather non-self, and begins attacking our own tissues. And when our tissues are attacked, then injury occurs to that tissue, which creates symptoms and ultimately, if not properly cared for and treated, can lead to disease.
Could you tell us how common autoimmune diseases are in society?
Yes, very common, Raul. 23.5 million Americans suffer from some form of autoimmune disease today. And actually, autoimmune diseases is the third leading cause of illness in the United States after heart disease and cancer.
Dr. Joe, as we dig deeper into this topic of autoimmune disease, what are some of the most common autoimmune diseases that people suffer from?
So the most common form of autoimmune disease is what's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That's when the thyroid gland becomes attacked by the immune system and then begins to malfunction, and people begin having a whole variety of thyroid type of symptoms. They become cold, they lose their hair, they lose motivation, energy, etc. And then what happens is most autoimmune diseases then run in clusters. It starts in the thyroid gland, and then it moves into other organ systems, injuring and attacking other organ systems. And that's what makes autoimmune diseases so devastating. It doesn't just stay in one system of the body. It begins to migrate and then involve other systems and cluster, as I said, and create significant damage to the body.
Dr. Joe, I know you listed just a couple, but how many different types of autoimmune diseases are there?
There are more than 100 different types of autoimmune diseases, and I mentioned Hashimoto's, but in addition to that, there's what's called rheumatoid arthritis, there's celiac disease, Crohn's disease, systemic lupus erythematosus, a mixed connective tissue disease. There's a whole variety of these autoimmune diseases that are sadly really undermining the health of Americans.
Wow. Speaking of Americans, is autoimmune disease at epidemic proportion in the American population?
So based on the most recent research and experts in autoimmune disease, yes, it is at an epidemic proportion, and sadly, people are really being harmed as a result.
How difficult is it to diagnose an autoimmune disease?
Well, that's another really good question. So autoimmune diseases are tricky. They present with a variety of different symptoms, and commonly the symptom picture of the patient doesn't make much sense. That's when you start to suspect autoimmune disease as a possible underlying cause of their symptoms. But for most people will see 5 different doctors over a 5-year period of time before they get an actual diagnosis of autoimmune disease. So that just tells you that, yes, it is very difficult to diagnose. And the more you work with it, though, and again, I've been working with autoimmune diseases now for many, many years, you begin to suspect when a person is suffering, and there's testing that can be done to determine if it is truly an autoimmune disease process going on in a person.
Wow. That is shocking on how difficult it is. Can you share with our listening audience on how someone develops an autoimmune disease?
So that's a great question, Raul. If you could just turn the camera to the video or to the board here. So Dr. Alessio Fasano, he's a medical doctor, gastroenterologist, and researcher, is the person who came up with this term, the autoimmune triad. And the triad stands for the 3 legs of this stool. And so here's the stool, here's the autoimmune disease process that's developed in an individual's body. But the first leg and the first underlying cause for the development in autoimmune disease is a person's genetics, their DNA, or their family history. Most of the time, what you'll find is when we take a thorough history of the patient, you'll find that there's some type of autoimmune disease process in the patient's past history, their family history, their parents, their grandparents, or a close relative. So that's the first leg, genetics, DNA, and really individuals, we don't have any say in what genetics we receive, so that's a tough one, but there's good news. Triggers are the second leg of this three-legged stool of the autoimmune triad, and triggers include a whole host and variety of things. When Dr. Fasano explained that, number one, that triggers can include medications that people have taken that have been disruptive to their overall physiology and immune system. Besides medications, it can be toxic chemicals in our food or in our water, processed foods. It can be infections. It can be stress. It can be food sensitivities. All of those things play a major role as triggers that cause the development of autoimmune disease. And then the third leg of this three-legged stool is what's called leaky gut. Leaky gut, if a person Googles leaky gut and autoimmune disease, they'll find many medical journal articles on the association between leaky gut and the development of autoimmune disease. And basically, leaky gut is when the small bowel has been injured to the point of developing microscopic holes as a result of inflammation in the lining of the small bowel. And that inflammation injures these tight junctions, it's called zonulin, that hold those cells together. It becomes injured, they break, which then allows for this gapping or this microscopic hole to develop in the lining of that small bowel. And then you have the bloodstream right underneath that single cell that makes up the small bowel. And then things begin to filter into the bloodstream and start circulating. And then the immune system comes in contact with that bacteria, the virus, that food protein, or whatever it is. And what happens then is the immune system recognizes that foreign substance is not invited to be in the bloodstream, and then it starts releasing a bunch of chemicals, which then drives the inflammatory process and ignites the autoimmune process to start developing in an individual's body. The good news is that in the American Journal of Pathology in 2008, which is a prestigious medical journal, they said that if triggers and leaky gut are properly addressed, you can actually arrest the autoimmune process in an individual's body. And that's what we do for people all the time. We identify the triggers, and then we heal the leaky gut, and then we begin arresting that attack against their own tissues. And it's really exciting. It's amazingly rewarding because you see people's lives dramatically change as they get their health back.
Wow. Dr. Joe, so what I hear you saying about the autoimmune triad is that with genetics, that leg, we don't necessarily have a say in how we can improve that because it's just the cards that we got dealt. But what I do hear you saying is that triggers and leaky gut, we can have a grasp on that and even look towards some way of actually improving our health through taking on those triggers and leaky gut. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And I've been doing that, as I mentioned, for many years to help people. And so, yeah, that is the roadmap to health and success with autoimmune disease.
So, Dr. Joe, I do know that you had mentioned a couple ways of already the treatment that you do, but can you be specific on what types of treatment do you offer for autoimmune disease? Is there any help for those people who have been suffering for years from some type of autoimmune disease?
Absolutely. So I had a lady who for 15 years was suffering from significant health issues, and her process was able to be arrested. Her health is returning dramatically, and it's exciting to watch. But the key pieces of it is that we take a thorough history and symptom survey, and then a chiropractic, physical, and orthopedic and neurological examination, so we really understand how the person's body is working. And then we do laboratory testing to identify, one, if a person doesn't know that they have autoimmune disease. We run lab tests to determine if that process is going on in an individual's body. And then we construct a lifestyle program specifically suited for their biochemistry and their sensitivities by putting them on a diet that is specific for their food reactions. So if they come back reactive to a specific food, we sit down and we just explain that food or foods can't be eaten for the next 3 to 6 months while the body's trying to repair the leaky gut and while we're trying to calm down all these other triggers. So the food piece is extremely important. If they have infection going on in their system, we address their infection using natural antimicrobials. We talk about stress. We talk about other recommendations that can rebalance their whole body health. And most people need education in this area, and we put them on a very specific low sensitivity nutrient plan to, again, support the recovery and to refortify and accelerate the healing of the damaged tissue. And so there's a variety of things that we do to make this process doable and make it happen in a timely fashion so people really can recover and arrest, not cure, but arrest their autoimmune process.
Dr. Joe, thank you so much for this foundational information on autoimmune disease and how the Center for Natural Healthcare can be a resource for those individuals looking for a natural approach to their autoimmune condition.
Thank you, Raul.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you have questions regarding autoimmune disease, the autoimmune triad, leaky gut, food sensitivity testing, GI stool testing, or anything else discussed in this podcast, please visit our website at www.centerfornaturalhealthcareredwing.com to schedule a no-charge 15-minute telehealth or telephone consultation with Dr. Sievely. Or if you would like to become a new patient, you can call us at 651-388-1211 to schedule your appointment today. The content of this podcast is in no way a substitute for professional medical care and treatment. The statements made on this podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA or other governmental agencies and are not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical conditions or diseases. Please consult your physician or healthcare provider if you have any medical health concerns. All information on this podcast provided by the Center for Natural Healthcare and Dr. Joseph Sievely is for educational purposes only.